I want to welcome Reverend Jesse Jackson, an iconic figure in American politics who ran a competitive campaign for president in 1988. He also marched with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and he's here today.
He's very tired.
Well, you have reason to be tired because you just returned from West Africa this morning after face-to-face negotiations with the president of Gambia for the release of 2 American citizens who were returned into your custody, who were in prison. You returned to JFK Airport today. One of them is a former University of Tennessee professor who was serving a life sentence for treason, and the other is an Operation Desert Storm veteran who was serving a 20-year sentence. Welcome, Reverend Jackson.
Let me say that we knew the Gambian economy has been growing, at 10% GDP growth, some development along the ocean front, the health system is kind of growing. And then we heard that 9 people have been executed last Thursday night, 9, and 37 more to be killed, scheduled to be killed this past Friday. We immediately called the president and asked him to allow us to come to the Gambia, meet with him, make a direct face-to-face humanitarian plea to declare an indefinite moratorium and to release some critical prisoners. Well, after 5 hours of negotiation on Monday, he made the decision, one, to declare that he would, the moratorium on the killings, indefinite, which would span the lives of 37 people on death row, and granted to us 2 American citizens and 2 Gambians. So really, 4 were pardoned, and 37 lives have been taken off of death row.
How did you find out about these 2 men, and what was the story behind you getting involved?
Well, you know, we heard about the 9 men and women, that were killed, hit world news. And in fact, 37 more were going to be killed, became a hue and cry among the human rights forces around the world. Fortunately, I had met the president several times before, I'd been to Gambia, and felt that we should at least try our very best. So I called and then wrote a letter. And delightfully, frankly, he called back so I could meet with him. So we caught the next plane smoking, went off to the Gambia and met with him on rather tough negotiations. He was first arguing sovereignty, his right to exercise the rights of his state, and arguing constitutional stuff. My appeals were not constitutional or legal. They were the moral appeal for humanitarian relief. So much of the good things happening in the Gambia are lost in the killing and in the arrest. One man who was a very brilliant former soldier, Desert Storm soldier, was locked up for 20 years on a charge that did not substantiate that.
Do you believe that they were innocent, or was it the punishment too severe, or what was it?
Well, you know, the term offense to a given government takes on different meaning. For example, the guys who led the Civil War against America never were charged with treason. That was one way. Another treason may be you do something. One of the men was wearing a T-shirt urging for demonstrations, and that he was charged. So these charges kind of go over a wide zone. But my interest was not the legality of it, it was the morality of it. It was trying to get them out of jail. And of course, what was, I think, most moving when the wife of the Desert Storm warrior got a call that her husband, who she can only see once every 3 months, was going to be set free. But she had to not tell anybody. She ran up and down the street, knocking on doors and beating pans in the street.
But this guy didn't even know that he was going to be released.
He did not know. He heard over the radio that I was in the city, something was going to happen. He did not know. And then she told her 2 sons, Dad's going to be set free. And they began to dress up. Why are you dressing up? I want Dad to see me in my best. I mean, it was a real tearjerker, you know. And then, but they still had not been told. So last night, we put on the airplane at 10 o'clock. They were told at 6 o'clock, pack your clothes, you're out of here, going straight out the country. They couldn't stop by their home. Now, what's the thing about that is that these guys left, they didn't go back to their room. They didn't put on their shoes, they put on some shower shoes, and they hit the road. Okay. But it was a beautiful airport reunion for the wife and the children, who also came. They're moving back to the States immediately. Other whose mother's 80-year-old mother, she was so happy to see her son who had been given a life sentence. And so a joyous celebration. I would hope that now that 4 have been pardoned, and 37 have been spared, that would open the door for more negotiations to get more either off death row or out of prison.
This is the 6th time that you've actually been able to negotiate for the release of Americans overseas. You're pretty good at this. What are the keys to being a good negotiator? To try to take the risk to do it. And to have a sense of where other governments, sometimes, for example, our embassy could not make the case against him, stop capital punishment, because we engaged in capital punishment. When you kill Troy Davis in Georgia and the whole world sees it, when you kill people by the hundreds in Texas and the whole world sees it, you lose the moral authority to speak to anybody in the world. We have the largest prison system in the world, and now private prisons for profit and prison labor. We don't have the moral authority to tell other people not to do that. And so I did not go represent the government. I made the moral appeal, because I had known him over some period of time. Please do something big. Spare these lives and let these men go home. And I found whether we were in Syria, Iraq, Yugoslavia, Liberia, as the case may have been, there's always some disconnect between those governments and our government, some no talk or not much talk policy. Secondly, we underestimate the impact of their religious leadership. That country is 90% Muslim. Muslims and Christians, they intermarry, they interrelate, and they embrace the U.S. embassy. There's no uprising there against the U.S. And the country is 90% Muslim. Maybe we could learn something from what's happening there. Thirdly, the impact of poverty in those countries and intelligence deficits. Once I sense what the lay of the land is, I then move in to make the moral appeal. And you've done this as a private citizen, but there was one point that you, as I said earlier, ran a competitive campaign for the President of the United States.
Something that Jimmy Carter does as a private citizen, he couldn't do it as president. Something that Bill Clinton does as private citizen. Sometimes, so there's a wiggle room for service. If you were to pretend you represent the government, that would be illegal, that would be wrong. But there's some latitude there for action, and if we take the action with the risk, it can work.
Do you ever feel that you would want to be back in public office? And if a position were offered to you, would you accept it?
No, but I'm interested in public service, and we've never stopped public service. And in this instance, I feel that our kinship with leaders around the world over a long period of time has given us a certain insight, a certain capacity to have impact. I hope that we'll get more out of the Gambia, but there are some other trouble spots. I think we could be a factor in helping resolve certain tensions.
The profound thing is I sense a very different leadership style from you today. You came into prominence, obviously, at a different time with a different set of realities, using a more confrontational style with fiery speeches, protests, and boycotts. Now you seem to be...
You just don't cover them.
You're working within the system with your Wall Street project. Has there been a style change? Maybe that's unfair to say, but has there been?
We're broadening the system. When we buy stock in corporations and go to shareholders' meetings and challenge them to open up and to be fair, that's challenging the system. We just had a big...
And that's a form of activism.
It's a form of activism. The struggle in Chicago, the big school strike, and everybody get the kids back to school, but they ignore the impact of inequality, poverty, and violence. Here have a school system, 160 schools without a library, 140 in black and brown schools. I mean, that's worth of a fight. It never was about style. It was always really about substance. And the substance of the Marching for Public Accommodation in 1964, the Marching for the Right to Vote, of open housing, we've always done what it was required to get desired results.
Mm-hmm. Is there still a need for a more confrontational style of leadership? You have, you're still out there. Reverend Sharpton is now working for MSNBC. But is there a need for a vigorous, youthful protest? And if so, are there candidates out there that could be the next Jesse Jackson?
Well, apples fall when you shake the tree. You have to keep making things happen. Because we are faced with confrontation. When someone purges 1,100,000 votes off the roll, votes off the roll in Ohio, that's confrontational. Take a million off the rolls, stroke of a pen in Pennsylvania, that's confrontational. When they develop schemes to make it more difficult to vote and therefore deny your vote counting, that is a confrontation. It must be met with a superior force so we can protect the right to vote and have the vote that we do cast to count.
Well, that was my next question. I mean, obviously you're in a position to really help the president with the get out to vote because you are a grassroots person and you're connected to the community. Are you concerned about the voter ID laws and the different things that could lower the get out the vote results?
It was designed to determine the outcome in the election. That could be margin, but his biggest asset right now is the inability of Mitt Romney to forge a campaign. The things he says and his attempt to marginalize people to gain votes has been bad for the nation, but an asset for the campaign. I would think that President Barack Obama's strength now is his record. He crusaded in.
So what's your 4-year report card for the president?
All right, he came in, we lost 4 million jobs. We've now gained 4.6 million, almost a 9 million vote swing. That's a report card, arrow pointing upward. The Live Better Act, pay equity for women, arrows are pointing upward for women. Detroit automotive industry was virtually collapsed and gone. Now they're running 3 shifts in Ohio and Illinois again. That's an arrow pointing upward. Well, 100,000 troops in Iraq. They're home now. The arrow is pointing upward. We are better off 4 years later.
And, you know, speaking as a civil rights activist and an advocate for the poor and advocate for racial minorities, if you look at urban cities like Detroit, for example, unemployment, especially among African-American men, has skyrocketed. It's touched 50% in some cases in major metropolis. What is the solution? And do you agree with people like Dr. Cornel West and Tavis Smiley that say that the president has basically let Black America down?
I don't agree with that, but I do think we should target zones of pain. What Lyndon Johnson did, given the racial sensitivities in our country, going to war on poverty in Appalachia at the University of Ohio in Athens, and kicked off, he passed the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, then the Medicaid, breakfast feeding program for the poor. So he made it clear, he deracialized the debate. Most poor people, you know, are not black, they're brown, they're white, they're female, they're young. Whether white, black, or brown, hunger hurts. I think there's a growing body of people who are in poverty. 50 million Americans are in poverty. 54 million are food insecure. 45 million on food stamps. This is the time for a targeted plan to live bottom up, not just top down. There are those who think that the swing vote is the middle class vote. Well, yesterday's middle class is today's poverty-stricken people. They've lost their homes, their jobs, and their cars. I would say the poor vote, a poor voter is a poor person is a rich voter. The 50 million, if they vote their hopes and their needs, the poor vote is the swing vote, not the so-called middle class vote. The poor voters must be taken into account. Their needs are real.
Okay, well, I hate to keep going back to race, but I'm sitting with Reverend Jesse Jackson, so I'm going to ask you, is race going to be an issue in this campaign, and has it been?
It has never stopped being an issue. The president has handled it marvelously well. He given his address in the Capitol, and a congressman from South Carolina, where the Fort Sumter shot was fired to maintain secession, slavery, and segregation. Now the Fort Sumter Tea Party calls him a liar. He was sending his signal, not so subtle. Trump saying he's not in America, he was not born here. That's a fairly clear message. He's not a Christian, he's a Muslim, he's not one of us. These signals, he's a welfare president, he's a food stamp president. These attacks have been nonstop, and yet he has an amazing degree of strength risen above those attacks. And I hope that the nation will make a judgment come November based upon the record, not upon the race.
I can remember back around Dr. King's birthday that you actually blasted Newt Gingrich for having what you described as a disdain for the poor. You mentioned that he called the president a food stamp president. You said that he had a total lack of understanding of the struggles of unemployed people in America. Do you think this attitude is endemic of Republicans, or is it really just an attitude of people within that sect of the Republican Party?
Food stamps come from people who have need for food subsidy. Food stamps first helps the farmer with the market. It helps the trucker. It helps the store. It helps the hungry. So really, food stamps for those who need it is a moral imperative. It's the right thing to do. But try to send a kind of a dual signal, but it's about race. Most poor people work every day, and they're the ones who wipe the bodies of the sick, go on to clean out their slop jars. No job is beneath them, and yet when they get sick, they cannot lie in the bed every day. The measure of our character is how we treat poor people, how we treat the least of these, how we treat those whose backs are against the wall. There's such a disdain for the poor, we hardly call their names. And that is why Dr. King and Lyndon Baines Johnson remain the pace setters for the issue of poverty and justice in our country.
Are you expecting that Romney will lose support from within the Republican Party among people who may not share the same 47% viewpoint?
His present views have embarrassed Republicans. He's not running a very competitive race. I thought he would be a much stronger candidate, but his views are so narrowly focused and so skewed, he's stepping further and further away from America's needs base.
Going forward, you know, what are your biggest concerns about the president in terms of what he has not been able to do? Are there areas where you are disappointed?
I hope that the next term there'll be a bigger focus on poverty. The burden of poverty, people who are poor don't have a bank account. They're unbankable. Therefore, they end up going to the secondary market. People who are poor hardly have a decent place to live. People who are poor are more likely to become sick. Infant mortality is higher. Life expectancy is shorter. People who are poor, children not like to go to college. People who are poor more likely to end up in the military because it's the backdoor draft, right? They can't afford to go to college. They can't get a job. They go to the military. Poor people are being treated with a disdain in our country, and that is immoral. Jesus said, I've been anointed to preach the gospel. Good news to the poor and to heal the brokenhearted.
Would really make sense for the president to embrace you because of the fact that you resonate with so many people.
I certainly support him. I think that against the odds, he's done a great job.
Where do you see your relationship with him? Is it strained? I know you had the microphone snafu in the last election.
I would think when we pass that, where we are, the snafu right now is in this economy. Too few people with too much wealth, too many poor people, too much unnecessary funded war. Therefore, it's thrown all of us out of kilter.
What are your concerns about your son right now? And I know that your family has really been supportive of him as he's gone into treatment for bipolar disorder, and he's out now.
He is he's regaining his strength. We pray for him daily and hope that he will be able to fully recover.
Do you have any insights on the way that mental disorders and depression and things like that are viewed and handled?
If someone is bleeding, we get a Band-Aid. The leg is broken, we get a splint. If it suggests he's emotional, mental, we run from it. The fact is, this issue of trauma and emotional instability, of bipolar, these illnesses deserve real treatment and should be insured just as other physical ailments are.
Is that another issue that you intend to become more involved in?
Well, we must, because the fact is, given the level of trauma in our society, and whether this thing is born of something genetic or born of something social, whatever illness that limits the growth of human personality, we must be willing to embrace and do so with a sense of daring and willingness to serve, to make ourselves available.
As you look at how your son went into the treatment, he was able to emerge and now is getting back on track. Do you have any regrets about how the family handled the announcement? Because it was such a long time. Was part of that the stigma that you felt that you might receive from announcing
it's something that kind of grows. You kind of don't know what to do. You're trying to find your way through. You first went to the hospital. I went to see him. He was clearly not there. We went to the hospital for 2 or 3 days. Doctor said, this, what we're doing here will not work. So we took him away, sent him away for a while to find out what was going on, which we did not know. So at first it was a kind of depressing order. Sure. And then after a certain time, we went to Mayo to get even more thorough treatment. And then others who have suffered the same or similar fate, Patrick Kent and others said, me too, we've been there. So I think that there's a growing body of people who are facing the impact of emotional stress and disorder as treatable diseases. But what we found is that it's hardly covered by insurance companies. It takes a lot of money. And so it takes detection, it takes money, time, and love.
There's a report that your son put his house on the market. Will he be running again for office?
Well, he has basically won his primary this year, and he's making some economic adjustments. This has been a very expensive long-term process, and so that's probably why that happened.
What is your hope going forward for your son?
That he will regain his strength and make getting well his first priority, and politics and anything else a distant second. Getting well is the first priority.
From the way it sounds, you're actually handling the politics now, going and actually helping these men get free in Gambia and continuing that fight.
Just a moral mission.
All right. Reverend Jesse Jackson, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you again, sir.
Amazing story, and we appreciate your sharing it with us.
Thank you, Minnesota man.
And with Reverend Jesse Jackson, I'm Lee Hawkins. We'll see you next time.
You have to keep this strong image in this game where weakness can be a dangerous thing to show.
It's not whether you're rich today. Don't tell me about that. Will you be rich tomorrow, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now?